We have found, both through things that have supported the two of us, as well as things that have supported our clients, an array of tools and practices and frameworks that help people overcome what we call the intimacy blockers. Anytime you have any intimacy, whether it's emotional, physical, sexual, whether it's 30 seconds or 30 minutes, you're making a deposit into the intimacy bank, which is enriching the overall intimacy in your relationship and making future sexual encounters feel more authentic and vibrant and accessible. It's harder to find access to our libido when it feels high stakes and sometimes obligatory.
For us, it's like, okay, how can we prioritize waking up Allie's body and moving slow and making that space and not falling into that trap more often? Be a little more spacious when we can.
Being able to notice when we have the capacity to give the other person what they need and when we're below capacity, when we're out of capacity, and how to ask for the support that would be most helpful for us.
There's also just maybe a little extra grace that we give each other for being a little messier and not communicating perfectly all the time.
I'm very excited to have a conversation today with Dr. Alison Ash and Sebastian Clark, a married couple, each of them experts in the realm of relationships and sexuality. And I'd love to have you introduce yourselves. Dr. Ali, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, yes. So I have been an intimacy educator and coach for over a decade, and I'm also a sociologist with a PhD, specializing in sex and gender, and I've done all sorts of research on the orgasm gap and college hookup culture, as well as queer identities and trans experiences. And I also lecture at Stanford University, teaching intimacy skills there. I just love working in this field and helping people have more access to the kinds of sexual interactions and romantic relationships that they desire.
Awesome. Sebastian?
Yeah, Sebastian, I also go by Seb, and I would say I've been a relationship nerd for, over 20 years now, and been doing this work for about 3 years. And before that, I was also working with neurodivergent folks, specifically people on the spectrum, and supporting them with how to connect and relate and just find comfort and ease in the world.
Beautiful. And I love hearing each of you has a different journey and obviously a part of your journey together. And so we will be talking about how to keep the spark alive, how to reignite the spark. But in the context of that conversation, I'd love for the two of you to present a bit of your own relationship story and kind of the personal side that informs the professional work you do.
Well, Sebastian and I met right before the pandemic. And so we are a true pandemic couple, and we've been married for a few years now. And our love has been really beautiful. It's been the most secure relationship I've ever had. And I think there's something about meeting your person later in life. I was already in my mid to late 30s. I think you really know when you found them. I've been around the block enough times to be able to be discerning and to be able to recognize how much of a gem Seb is, and how absolutely nourishing and beautiful this relationship is. I feel so grateful for it and so committed to continuing to invest in it and nurture it.
One thing that I think in our early journey that stood out for me was that we both came in with some attachment awareness of our own nervous systems and what we needed. And there was something really powerful about how we created that sort of safety and security in the beginning by being thoughtful and sensitive to what each of our different needs around that were. And so there were times where Allie really wanted to spend the night together, and I was feeling a little more avoidant and like needing to make sure I wasn't going too fast. And she would share her disappointment when I would have that boundary, and I would stay and kind of make space for that disappointment and also share my desire to stay connected and keep moving deeper with her, even if that night wasn't the time. And then she would really make space for my boundary and my need for going slower. And there was something really powerful about that kind of attachment sensitive space.
You staying with my disappointment and need for reassurance was made so much easier by knowing how much I respected your needs and boundaries and your pacing, and vice versa. And so I think that there's a way here that we've both really efforted to see the other person for who they are and meet them where they're at.
I hear the story from when you were growing your relationship. Share something where you've each brought your understanding attachment and needs and boundaries, some way that has been relevant in an interaction.
I can say post-election, it has been really hard for the two of us to be with the outcome of the election. We obviously want to make this feel like a safe space for all your listeners, whatever their political affiliation may be. And for us, we've been grieving and feeling shock and feeling confusion. And I think we both process this in slightly different ways and have needed different things. And I have needed a lot of emotional comfort and somebody to hold me while I've been crying. And Seb has needed a little bit more space. He's like hiding under the covers sometimes and just like, I don't want to, like very much hermiting. And so being able to notice when we have the capacity to give the other person what they need and when we're below capacity, when we're out of capacity, and how to ask for the support that would be most helpful for us.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because the question that arose in me, and I'll ask you, Seb, when Dr. Ali needs emotional connection and comfort and being held and what you really yearn for is alone under the covers, how do you talk yourself through that? And when do you decide, I'm available, even though I'd rather be under the covers? And when do you decide, I'm not available because I need to be under the covers?
I've learned that Allie's emotional experiences are often short. And so if I can lean into them, then I tend to find that it's not as draining as maybe parts of my kind of inner fear story kind of wants to tell me. And I also find like there's not as much that I actually have to do in that space. And I think, especially for guys in hetero dynamics, we get so anxious that we need to do a lot when our partner is feeling sad and emoting. And what am I going to say? And how am I going to make her not feel this way? And the reality is I can just be there with her and hold her and care. There's an element of empathizing and genuine care that's actually often enough. And, getting tissues is usually part of my role. And so I do find that a lot less exhausting and draining than, I think in past relationships, I've felt holding space for big feelings. And yeah, at the same time, there are times where I've had a long work day or for whatever reason, I'm just not available. And I think we worked pretty hard to make space to communicate boundaries and needs when they come up in as good of a way as we can.
It's not always pretty, but it's honest.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think a caveat of a time like this where we're feeling a kind of collective intense grief space or under-resourced overwhelm, then there's also just maybe some a little extra grace that we give each other for being a little messier and not communicating perfectly all the time, and just like, okay, that wasn't great, and we don't need to like nitpick and pick each other apart for not communicating in the perfect way that we always aspire to.
Okay, well, there is such a clean and gentle quality in all those communications that two of you are making about how it is. And so I actually want to just transition, because the two of you have a course and various materials to support couples who want to reignite the spark. And the thing that I want to hear about is how you go about choosing curriculum? Because you have different personalities, different lenses, different orientations. So give us a preview of the content in that course, but also how you choose what to put in it in the context of what you've just shared about your relationship already.
So the course that you're referring to is called Sustainable Intimacy, Reignite the Flame for the Long Game. And it's a course that we decided to create because a lot of our clients are couples who are struggling with this. Either they've never really felt like they've had the sexual connection that they want, or they've lost the spark somewhere along the way and they want to reignite it. It's a pretty common experience, I would say, oftentimes universal for couples in truly long-term relationships, for it to at least come up at some point in the trajectory of that partnership. And we have found, both through things that have supported the two of us, as well as things that have supported our clients, an array of tools and practices and frameworks that help people overcome what we call the intimacy blockers, the things that get in the way of feeling their turn on, desire, and libido. And then what are the practices that they can do together that will help them reacquaint with that part of themselves and that part of their relationship, and start to move towards intimacy in a way that reduces pressure, reframes things that could feel like a failure into a win, celebrates small steps, all of these concepts that have been proven to be effective. So when we were creating the course, I think I have to say, I've been teaching for years before I even knew Sebastian, and the material that we've created together sometimes is more frustrating to create, but ultimately has been so much better for it. Because I think when you get two people who have vastly different life experiences and different orientations and different sometimes priorities, there's a little bit more massaging that has to happen to really get to the good stuff and to figure out not just what order to include, but what makes the cut and what doesn't make the cut. Sometimes there is a little bit of frustration, and sometimes we have to put it down and take a break and revisit it the next day. But for the most part, I feel that the things that Seb wants to add, I'm like, oh yeah, great idea. That's awesome. And then in terms of order, oftentimes that comes through teaching it several times. We'll gather afterwards and we'll talk about what worked well, or actually, I think this was a little bit of an awkward transition. Let's try moving it around this way.
Yeah, I think we're often on the same page around a lot of that stuff, and a lot of the content. There's definitely been times where we've one of us has dug our heels in, and I think usually we give each other some space, unless it's like, oh, I feel really strongly that you're wrong, that it's like, okay, if you think that's really important, let's see if we can fit it in. I think one place we tend to kind of find friction is more in our pace of teaching. I think can be a little bit tricky because we have so much content, and I'm of the philosophy that I would rather cut content and go slower and talk slower. And Dr. Ali is a well-practiced teacher who can talk quite quickly and learn quite quickly. So we have some different philosophies there that is always kind of a funny thing to navigate in the moment.
The differences you've just described, does that show up in your lovemaking?
I don't know if I would say in the same dynamic in terms of me being slower.
Yeah, I think that our lovemaking is a place where I don't feel so rushed oftentimes. Now, we are having conception-oriented sex, which is far more goal-oriented than our normal sexual encounters, and can be a little trying when you're, doing it in the fourth day in a row, which I know you don't always have to do it every day in a row, but we're overachievers. It's harder to find access to our libido when it feels high stakes and sometimes obligatory. And it's exactly what we don't teach couples to do. And a deep value of ours is to never have obligatory sex, and to really do everything we can to unpack pressure and create permission, and to not have it be goal oriented. It's okay if it doesn't end in penetration, or if nobody comes, or whatever. We just put it all on the table. And that's been really healing, I think, for both of us. And then you try to have conception-oriented sex, and all of a sudden there are real goals and needs, and sometimes time constraints and times that you're having sex when you wouldn't really want to be having sex. And so I think given all of that, we're really using a lot of the material from this course to help us unpack pressure, to help us increase our libido and our sense of connection, to even reframe experiences that could feel like a failure. We have sex, maybe Seb has a hard time ejaculating for whatever reason, and that could feel like a loss. Or we can reframe it as, well, great, we just like ramped up the libido and we put some intimacy in the tanks, and it's going to make the next time more accessible and feel easier, and to stay connected emotionally through the highs and the lows and the peaks and the valleys of just having such a earnest heart longing and trying to navigate the emotional terrain that includes.
Women's bodies, female bodies tend to take longer to have arousal come online. And for guys, it's very like, I'm ready, let's dive in, let's get going.
Literally.
Literally, yes. Yeah, exactly. Penises and vaginas, ready to go. But for us, it's like, okay, how can we kind of prioritize waking up Allie's body and moving slow and making that space and not falling into that trap more often, to have it be a little more spacious when we can.
And the one thing that Seb does, which is my favorite, I teach a workshop called How to Eat Pussy Like a Champ. And this is one of my secret tips and tricks I give in that workshop, is to put your mouth over the vulva. You can have the underwear on or underwear off, and you just, that kind of hot breath that you would use to steam up the window to write in the steam. And just lay there and just hot breathe on my vulva for sometimes a while, and almost always that will get me going if I don't feel pressure and rushed and curious, right? I think the opposite of pressure is curiosity.
Yeah, and I know in your body of work and also in this conversation, you've talked about pressure, but will you just expand on what you mean?
Yes, there's so many different ways pressure can show up. If my partner has a higher libido and I don't want them to feel rejected, and so I have sex maybe when I don't really want to because I want them to not feel bad, or go for longer than I want, or have different kinds of sex than is actually the kinds of sex I might want because there's differences in desires between partners, or sometimes even, I'll have pressure because we haven't had sex in a little while. And I feel like, oh, we should be having sex. Or I want to make sure it doesn't go too long, whatever air quotes too long maybe. Or pressure around feeling like I'm taking too long, or my needs might be too much.
I think a lot of it is to perform in a certain way, to be embodied and attuned in good enough. And I think pressure is that feeling that the way that I am in this moment is not going to be okay, and that I will need to be or show up in some specific way that I don't know if I'll have control over or if I want to do. I think generally that sense of pressure can put us into our heads and be this sort of emotion in our chest that can block us from actually being curious about what's available, and also from connecting to our partner, our lover in that moment.
I'm really glad you both expanded on that, because I think what you've said is so relevant for a couple that has been together for a few decades. It is relevant for a couple having conception-oriented sex. It is relevant for a couple who has 1, 2, or 3 young children, and that has disrupted the intimacy they might both want to have. So I really appreciate you just giving what is in the umbrella term around pressure. And You've given one technique for shifting that. I love it. The gentle dragon breath, I'll say.
I love that. That's great.
I might steal that from you.
Okay, well, you're welcome to it. Will you each give us one more technique that you either use yourself or together that helps you pivot away from pressure and into desire?
Absolutely, yeah. It might be hard to just give one each, but we'll try.
Well,
I think the biggest one is permission. So we talk about naming the elephant in the room. And so often pressure, similar to shame and other emotions, thrives when it's kept in the dark, right? And when we let our partner in on what we're feeling and we name that elephant in the room, and it's received with kind of permission for it to be okay, and the attention can shift from sexual to emotional intimacy for a little bit of time, that can be just very helpful in easing that sort of inner tension and that kind of looping snowball effect that pressure can create so strongly. So yeah, I would say naming the elephant in the room, big one.
I'm so glad you shared that. I think so often that is the starting point. It's like there's a wall, and what you just described evaporates the wall when both people are able to partake. What a beautiful, beautiful way to pivot from pressure, not directly to desire, but on the way to desire.
That's right.
Totally.
Yeah. What about you, Dr. Ali?
We teach this concept called the intimacy bank. We both teach it and we both use it. And the idea of the intimacy bank is every couple has an account in the intimacy bank. And anytime you have any intimacy, whether it's emotional, physical, sexual, whether it's 30 seconds or 30 minutes, you're making a deposit into the intimacy bank, which is enriching the overall intimacy in your relationship and making future sexual encounters feel more authentic and vibrant and accessible. And what I think is so important about the intimacy bank is it reframes something that could feel like a failure because it didn't end in sex or orgasm, whatever you want, into a win because it's a deposit into the intimacy bank. So if Seb and I are trying to be intimate and I'm feeling pressure, usually I'll name it and then he'll do his adorable thing where he'll say, "Hi, pressure," which just always takes the level of activation down. And then one of the things he'll reassure me is, I'm just happy to be intimate with you. I'm really glad we're making this time for each other. No matter what we're doing, we're making that deposit in the intimacy bank. It doesn't have to look any particular way. It doesn't have to end in anything particular. Let's just be together and explore and see what happens. And that is, again, so permission giving, and it allows me to drop into my body more and shift from pressure to curiosity and to gratitude, which is also very regulating and resourcing emotion.
It feels so good to hear the two of you describing it. It's irresistible in its own way, but I am going to ask you a question because it is my deep conviction that intimate relationships are the ultimate vehicle for personal growth. So I would love to ask you, Dr. Ali, what you have learned about yourself as a result of being married to Seb.
I love this question. I could not agree with you more. I do think that there's certain growth we can actually only do in intimate relationships. And I think the biggest gift Seb has given me has been to really relate to me as though my big emotions, and I do think that there's a spectrum in how big people feel their emotions. And I am very far on the end of the spectrum where I feel things very intensely. And I've always felt like that was a burden. I think I felt like that was a burden in my family system. It has felt like a burden to me. I haven't always felt like I've had the capacity to be with the intensity of my feelings. It's felt like a burden to friends and community at times. And Seb is the first human I've met who has truly had me feel like my big feelings are a gift and not a burden. And the way that he welcomes them and makes space for them and helps me see that they're not as big in an unmanageable way as I might think that they are. And I think it's helped me start to relate to them differently and to be able to hold myself through really big feelings in a way that I don't think I've ever had the capacity, to not just have to numb out and distract or immediately go to somebody else for support, but to be able to sit with it and to ride the waves.
May we all learn that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Seb, what have you learned about yourself as a result of being married to Dr. Ali?
I think something that really just comes up in this moment is how capable I am. I think, she has been such a relentless cheerleader for me and, a believer in my skill and capacity, whether it's doing work projects on our house, learning how to be more handy, or professionally, or just with mundane tasks in so many different ways. There's this way that she holds knowing my capacity and what I'm capable of, that some of my inner critic and my kind of wounding has a really hard time holding for itself. And to get that kind of reflection constantly of being believed in has, just been a lesson and a gift. I don't have many words for, except all those.
That's exquisite. You've such parallel learnings in your different contexts. It's really beautiful. All right. Well, what would you like to share about your course as we wrap up? We've talked about it some already, but what else?
If you go to turnon.love/sustainable-intimacy, and all of these will be in the show notes, you can access this course, which we do teach live, either online or in person in the Bay Area or as a retreat a few times a year, but we also have it available as an on-demand rental, meaning you and your partner can rent it from home anytime that you'd like. I also have a 2-month course starting in January. I teach it every January through March. It's called Sexual and Emotional Intimacy Skills. And that's great for individuals or couples. And all of our material, by the way, are also applicable for folks in either monogamous or non-monogamous dynamics. And in Sexual and Emotional Intimacy Skills, I go over a wide range of topics that I think are absolutely essential to us having the kind of intimacy that we want. So whether you're wanting to deepen the partnership you have right now or find a meaningful partnership, this is the course for you. And I have a $75 discount code for your listeners. Intimate Marriage, which will also be in the show notes, will give folks $75 off the course in January. And if you happen to be listening to this podcast some other time in the year, that's also available on demand when I'm not teaching it live. And then we have a wide range of on-demand workshops, including How to Eat Pussy Like a Champ, which I referenced earlier, but about 15 other ones as well on topics related to emotions and sex that you can rent from home. And then last but not least, you could always reach out for intimacy coaching and talk and work with either me or Seb around how to both explore and learn the experiential skills that allows us to have the kind of intimacy that we want, as well as unpack some of the deeper core material that can make it hard to implement those skills. Things like your attachment styles, trauma history, family dynamics, cultural, religious upbringings, etc. And so we really do love working with folks in that kind of an intimate way. And so please feel free to reach out for a complimentary consultation.
Thank you. That is wonderful. And I thank you both so much for your time and really beautiful sharing about yourselves and your work.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to be on your podcast, and we hope to come back sometime.
Yeah, beautiful. Really sweet to spend some time with you.
This is a really powerful platform that you've created so many people can learn and grow and find more sexual and emotional empowerment. And I really see that effort and dedication. So thank you for making that available and for letting us be a part of it.
It is my pleasure.